Tonight's event is celebrating something that happened in 1968, which was the production, or rather the release, of the film 2001: A Space Odyssey. Is there anybody here who has not seen that movie? Because if there is anyone here who has not seen the movie, you have two options. One is to leave now, and the other is to promise to see it over the Memorial Day holiday weekend. But it's not to be missed. I think everybody has seen it, glad to say. So hard to believe. I was shocked when we were planning this event and realized this is the 50th anniversary of that film, which I think is as good and as timely and as amazing in its special effects today as it was when it was released. It's just incredible. I'm going to read one little short bit about this and then turn the podium over to Frank. This it says, today, 2001: A Space Odyssey is widely regarded as one of the greatest and most influential films ever made. Note, that's not science fiction film or strange space film. It's film, period, ever made. In 1991, it was deemed culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant by the United States Library of Congress and selected for preservation in the National Film Registry. Sight and Sound magazine ranked 2001: A Space Odyssey 6th in the top 10 films of all time in its 2002 and 2012 critics polls editions. It also tied for second place in the magazine's 2012 directors poll. And in 2010, it was named the greatest film of all time by the Moving Arts Film Journal. Now that's pretty amazing. And we have a speaker tonight who is almost as spectacular as the film itself. And I will now turn the podium over to Frank, who will introduce tonight's speaker. Frank?
Thank you. Hi. You stole my line. You stole all my lines, in fact. Okay, my name is Frank Marchis. I'm a researcher at the SETI Institute, and I will be kind of hosting this event today. Yeah, I was amazed when I found out that this movie has been released 15 years ago. I mean, I do remember the first time I've seen it, and a lot of you have remembered that. I discussed with some of you here today, and we all remember some very specific part of this movie. We remember that, for instance, he predicted quite well some part of our future, like the invention of iPad or Skype. Have you seen that? If you look at it again, you will see Skype is there. It's not called Skype, but it's like Skype. We know this movie for this music. If you hear this Tusra, you know this is coming from this movie, even if it's not been done for this movie. It's the first big budget for a sci-fi movie in history of humanity, which is kind of surprising. Before, sci-fi was kind of for B movies only, short budget, done very quickly. This was a large production. And of course, the experience. I mean, we do all remember the first time we have seen this movie. Some people say they have kind of a religious experience seeing this movie because of the story, because of the atmosphere, because of the revelation of thought that came after watching this movie. But for me, what really attracted me when I saw this movie is this character that is not a human. It's HAL. HAL, French people will say HAL, but I will say HAL, I will try, okay. He's not a human, but he's a very important part of the movie. So 50 years later, we have computers that can, very powerful computers in our hands. We have formalized the mathematics of artificial intelligence. We have data flowing in our computers that are useful to train our artificial intelligence. So we can wonder now if we could create something like HAL, if it's possible to create a machine which has this consciousness and will take this radical decision that I described in the movie. So to answer to this question, we invited Dr. David Stork here. So David has a very long resume, and he told me, please make it short and make it nice. So I'm going to make it as short as possible, David. I'm sorry. So David is a researcher in pattern recognition, machine learning, computer vision. He graduated in physics from MIT and University of Maryland, has a faculty position in various departments: physics, mathematics, computer science, electrical engineering, statistics, neuroscience, psychology, and art. So he was a professor at the Wellesley and Swarthmore College, but also at different universities such as Clark, Boston University, and of course, Stanford University. David is also a fellow of 6 different societies. He mentioned them to me. I don't remember all of them, but I do remember SPIE, IEE, societies which are related to engineering, artificial intelligence, industrialization. So why we have David here today? Well, it's because he edited a very interesting book which was published in 1990, I think, or 91? 97, sorry, which is basically called HAL Legacy, 2001 Computer as Dream and Reality. So please join me and welcome David. Thank you for coming here to give a talk.
Well, thank you, Bill, and thank you, Frank, and thank you all for coming, and thanks to the SETI Institute and SRI for hosting this. Well, as was pointed out, April 2nd was last month was the 50th anniversary of the first release to the public of 2001: A Space Odyssey. It was shown in Washington, D.C., at the Uptown Cinerama Theater on Massachusetts Avenue. I grew up in Chevy Chase, and I saw it 3 weeks thereafter, and it changed my life. This was such a remarkable experience, unlike anything I'd seen before, and it certainly was a large influence in getting me to go into science and technology. And frankly, I think the SETI people will be happy to hear that I started out at MIT in astrophysics. I studied under Phil Morrison, one of the great SETI experts. But then AI and artificial intelligence and computer vision and all these things started growing, and I got more and more interested in that. And even though I got my PhD in physics, I was working also in a psychology department and was very interested in perception and so forth, so I could work on those kinds of things. So it was HAL more than the Discovery spaceship that really captured me in 2001. And how did I end up editing this book, 2001? Well, if you've read or seen the movie, as you all have, you'll recall that in the film, HAL becomes operational on January 12th, 1992. Well, I was living on the Stanford University campus. I was working on Sand Hill Road in a research lab. And on January 12th, 1992, which was a Sunday, I had a party for HAL's birthday. Real birthday. Anyway, birthday. And I invited lots of Silicon Valley notaries to come. And I invited Daniel Dennett, a very distinguished philosopher who lives in Boston, and he couldn't come. But he contacted the Associated Press, and they sent a reporter and a cameraman and so forth. And we had a cake in the shape of HAL with a clear glass dome and a red LED underneath it. And as we were cutting the cake, we were all singing, Daisy, Daisy. And an engineer was turning the power down on the red LED. And it was a great deal of fun. But pictures of me cutting the HAL cake appeared worldwide. A friend of mine sent one in from Thailand. And it became clear that I wasn't the only sort of 2001 nerd around. And I thought, OK, well, 2001's coming up in a couple of years. Why don't I put together a book? And I started writing a book on HAL to compare what the movie predicted would happen in 2001 with what actually happened. What did they get right? What did they get wrong? And why? And I spent a lot of time on it. And while I was doing my real research, and I thought, maybe it would be better to get some of the world's leading experts in different disciplines to see the movie, analyze the movie, and compare it to the state of the art in 2001. Well, now, and I made this PBS television documentary thanks to the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, and that's what we'll be showing clips from this evening. And you'll see that we really couldn't build a HAL in 2001. But it's 2018, and we're getting really close. There are things that we can do now that Kubrick and Clark predicted might be possible in 2001 that weren't, but we're getting really close on certain ones. And I'll show you some of those as we go. So what I'd like to do is get rid of PowerPoint. Hooray. and show some clips from my documentary that illustrate exactly the kinds of technology that is shown in the movie, and then what was happening in reality in the year 2001, and then I'll come back and sort of comment on it as we, after that. So I have to go like this, and...
One of the earliest scenes in the spaceship
forget lights
shows
down.
HAL playing an enjoyable game of chess. Chess appears in many of Kubrick's films, and he himself was an expert. In the 1950s, he used to hustle chess in Washington Square Park for 50 cents a game. Chess has long been considered a hallmark of human intelligence, and in 1950, computer pioneer Alan Turing first proposed using chess as a test of computer intelligence, too. He liked it because it seemed to require reasoning and pattern recognition and strategy, but also because the chessboard could be easily represented in a computer memory. He predicted that by the end of the 20th century, computer chess systems would be able to beat any human being, just as Kubrick's film shows.
Anyway, queen takes pawn. Okay?
Bishop takes knight's pawn.
Oh, lovely move. Rook to king 1.
I'm sorry, Frank, I think you missed it. Queen to bishop 3, bishop takes queen, knight takes bishop, mate.
Yeah, looks like you're right. I resign.
Thank you for a very enjoyable game.
Yeah, thank you.
At the time of 2001's release in 1968, the best computer chess program played only at the level of an average tournament player. Certainly no match for HAL. In the early 1970s, however, there was a major breakthrough. Instead of mimicking the way humans played chess, researchers began building brute force systems that relied on the computer's ability to search a large number of possible moves. As computer speeds increased, driven by Moore's law, these systems steadily gained in strength. By the late 1980s, computer chess programs were beginning to surpass all but the best players. In the 1990s, a team of researchers at IBM took up the challenge of computer chess as a test of their latest generation of supercomputers. The system they developed was called Deep Blue, a massively parallel supercomputer optimized for playing chess and capable of calculating up to 200 million board positions every second.
Humans and computers have a drastically different style of play. Human beings have this ability to look at a position and intuit what are the best moves, the 2 or 3 best moves, the moves that are most worth looking at, and they'll examine them, and then often based on gut feel more than anything, play the best move. Deep Blue begins by looking at all possible sequences of moves down to some depth, say 4 moves ahead. And each of the positions that can possibly be reached, it evaluates them in a fairly complex way for computers and comes up with a number. This is how good the position is. And then it chooses a move. Then, if there's time, it'll look 5 moves, 6, 7, and so on, and it'll end up maybe looking 11 or 12 moves ahead. As you go deeper in chess, it's what's called an exponential growth. Every time you look 1 move deeper, it takes 5 times as long. Even with 200 million chess positions per second, you can only look a limited distance into the future, maybe 11, 12, 13, 14 moves. Our observations were that human grandmasters were able to look deeper than that, down certain specialized lines, the critical lines.
In 1997, IBM invited world chess champion Garry Kasparov to play Deep Blue in a 6-game match to test the capabilities of their new machine. Kasparov was widely considered to be the best chess player in history. The year before, he had played an earlier version of Deep Blue and soundly defeated it. But in the year leading up to the rematch, the IBM team had been busy. They had doubled Deep Blue's computing power and hired a grandmaster to give it more chess knowledge.
And now he has entered the hall. The playing area has Garry Kasparov.
Kasparov won the first game.
We should set the stage. Kasparov has set this whole thing up as he's defending mankind. Mankind against the ever-encroaching speed and complexity and problem-solving ability of the computer.
Game 2 of the match with Kasparov was an amazing game. It was probably the best game ever played by a computer. It played in a very human style, and that perplexed Kasparov. Even to this day, he doesn't understand how a computer can play in such a human style.
I get the feeling I'm learning from watching the computer play these moves, as it just maps out all counterplay for Garry, and it just sort of makes him suffer, you know, as it keeps all the advantages.
When you've been playing chess all your life, you get a feel for the opponent on the other side of the board, what sort of things they're thinking, what they're capable of, what they're not capable of. And playing against Deep Blue, Kasparov had to create an image, a mental image, a model of what his opponent was in order to better play the game. And he had to create a model of Deep Blue that was unlike anything he'd ever created before.
Deep Blue won Game 2, and the next 3 games were draws. Going into the final game of the match, Kasparov and the computer were tied.
Kasparov has altered his style to play against the computer, but he's paid a price. He's not playing the kind of chess that comes naturally to him.
It was scary to sit across from Mr. Kasparov at the table because this is a man who never in his life had lost a chess match, and he was losing this one. This is very emotional. I mean, you could see him getting very upset. I was getting upset in reaction to this.
Whoa! Deep Blue, Kasparov, after the move C4, has resigned.
On May 11th, 1997, computer intelligence came of age. Deep Blue defeated world chess champion Garry Kasparov.
So the world champion lost a match to a chess computer, and it was quite a trauma for him.
Because, you know, I'm a human being, you know, and after game 2, I had some major problems of coming back to the match. I proved to be vulnerable. So, you know, when I see something that is well beyond my understanding, I'm scared, and that was something well beyond my understanding.
The question of whether or not Deep Blue is intelligent has often come up, and I have a very strong opinion on that. I believe that Deep Blue is not intelligent, the reason being that it has no generality. It's able to solve one particular problem extremely well, but can't go beyond that to look at anything else. For example, Deep Blue can't even play checkers, even though it's almost the same as chess in some way.
Deep Blue's victory was indeed a triumph for artificial intelligence research, but it relied more on raw computing power than on intelligence. Chess is a closed realm which can be modeled mathematically. The real world is not so simple.
So there are several aspects of the scene in 2001 that bear noting. First of all, that game that they actually play came from a 1913 Grandmaster game. So it was transcribed and it's particularly brilliant, the moves that HAL makes. Another important point of that scene was just, you remember how Frank just says, okay, I resign. That would have been shocking in 1968. The thought that a computer could beat a human was sort of shocking. Many people didn't think it would ever happen, and by making it so banal, oh yeah, a human lost, it was really a great insight of Kubrick and Clark to say, of course computer intelligence is going to supersede humans. It's sort of inevitable. And in fact, you get this throughout 2001. I mean, when Heywood Floyd is flying from the Earth to the moon, you know, there's the most spectacular view out his window. And, you know, he doesn't even look out. He's just, oh, this is, you know, like, you know, taking BART. So those are really important aspects of this scene. Well, what has happened since 2001? Well, for those of us who work in pattern recognition and machine learning and so forth, we all thought that the game of Go would be far, far away from us, making a machine play Go at a world champion level. And the reason is that the basic technique that was used in Deep Blue, which is basically exhaustive search, trying to explore many, many possible positions and then rank them and then make a move, simply will not work for Go. The number of possible moves is so astronomical, and Go masters look so far ahead that you'd take, you know, many times the age of the universe, with the whole universe being a compute power, in order to try and calculate that. So that technique would not work on Go, and all of us in the field knew that. What was necessary was to be more human-like in pattern recognition. When you talk to a Go master, and I used to play a little bit of Go at MIT, I remember playing against a Japanese master. They're ranked by stones. The details aren't important, but I would play and then be absolutely crushed. You know, I give up. And he would just take the board, turn it around, and play my position and crush me. So, so there are people, I was not particularly good, but he was extremely good. So the way Go succumbed just recently in the last few years, AlphaGo and so forth, was using techniques called deep learning, training neural networks that have many, many layers and connection weights that allow it to abstract out and see patterns and structures. And so not searching as much as seeing the patterns. And those of us who play chess, and I used to play chess very seriously. I was in the high school chess championships 2 years in a row, many, many long years ago. You look at a board and you see, that's the right move. You don't start saying, oh, what if I do this? What if I do this? And so forth. And it's that sort of style that now allowed these deep neural networks to play Go, beating a Korean international grandmaster a couple of years ago. And it keeps getting faster and faster, so that you have more compute power, but you also have better training data, more examples of games and so forth. So I think it was 1 year after that match against the Korean Go master that the same hardware could then simultaneously play and beat 20 masters. And it's going to keep exponentially improving and so forth. And the same thing's been happening with chess and so forth. So we're really now at a period where these kinds of games are succumbing to pattern classification and raw compute power, both put together. It's really an exciting time to be doing this kind of stuff. All right, so now I'm going to go to the next one.
We learn about the world by experiencing it with our senses. If we want to create a computer that comes close to understanding the world the way we do, it has to be able to see. Vision is something we often take completely for granted. We open our eyes, and there it all is. We know what we're seeing without having to think twice. But what's happening in our brains as we process this information is nothing short of miraculous. We recognize objects. We know places. What's easy for us is very difficult for a computer. The complex process of perceiving and understanding the world is something today's computers are just beginning to tackle, but which HAL did effortlessly.
Good evening, Dave.
How you doing, Hal?
Everything's running smoothly. And you?
Oh, not too bad.
Have you been doing some more work?
A few sketches.
May I see them?
Sure.
That's a very nice rendering, Dave. I think you've improved a great deal. Can you hold it a bit closer?
Sure.
That's Dr. Hunter, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
How do you get a computer to recognize someone? Computers recognize a face, or any other object, by using pattern recognition. If the pixels on the screen add up to a shape that's similar to one in the computer's memory, then it can match and hence recognize it.
So basically how face recognition works is first you get an image of a face. You have to do some sort of pre-processing to it, adjust for color variations or whatnot, and then you have to represent that face by a set of numbers. Take 2,000 images, do a very standard classical statistical analysis called principal components, and you recover these ghostly-looking faces, which are referred to as eigenfaces. And basically, they describe the principal variations. What's the most variable aspect of a face? And they're sort of listed in rank order. So the first one turns out to be basically the presence of bangs in your forehead. And the second one is a lighting gradient from left to right, which you can see right here. And as you go on to higher order ones, you can see things having to do with facial hair and expressions, and this continues up to very high orders. Here we're going to take this face and add each component eigenface one by one with its corresponding amplitude. And you can see in the output, you very quickly form a very accurate reconstruction of that individual.
Scanning now.
Recognizing from frontal correctly lit mugshots is actually quite easy. What's hard is to recognize a person as their pose changes and as the illumination changes. And one way to actually do this is to acquire a 3D model. This can actually be acquired from video or even from a still image. And once you have the shape component, as you can see in psychological tests have shown, actually this is somewhat sufficient to actually allow for accurate face recognition. Of course, what we would like to do is to actually combine the shape and texture components. And then we have a 3D model, and we can make this individual look in any direction. We can put him in different environments. We can shade him and render him and light him in different conditions. And so once the computer has this model, he will be able to recognize this person in the difficult cases which have to do with pose variations and lighting variations.
Recognizing faces from photographs is easy for a computer, compared to the problem of recognizing what's happening in a scene from real life.
Recognizing a single person is a recognition problem, is finding a particular face or a particular object. But sometimes you want to find members of a class, all possible faces, detect any face or detect any person in an image. In HAL's case, knowing where the people were was probably really valuable, and being able to decide where the crew members were in the ship. And this is again a problem where a vision system can be trained to do it. What we do is take a computer vision system and we show it a bunch of examples of people. Different clothing, different settings, different poses. The system learns what it thinks is a common description, a template or an example of what a person would look like in an image. And then based on that, it will try and detect anytime it sees a person in an image. This is a little clip of video. And you see the outline of every place that the computer has detected a person. Every once in a while, it accidentally finds something that says, maybe that's a person. For the next frame, it's not there. It can say, no, it wasn't. It was just something that I'm hallucinating. I thought it was a person. It's not really a person. So there's an example. If you look right here, it's found the person. And right above it, it's got this box that has accidentally lined up to be a set of things that it thinks matches a human. And if I let this go, you'll see that, in fact, in the next frame, that box is going to disappear and it's going to find that person.
The holy grail of vision research is to program a computer to analyze scenes. The computer must be able to name all the objects in the scene and also describe their relationships. At MIT's Artificial Intelligence Lab, researchers have been developing a system which can analyze the events that are taking place in the surrounding environment. During a typical day, hundreds of pedestrians and vehicles move around the lab in patterns which the computer has learned to recognize. Having learned the normal patterns of activity, the computer can also recognize when something unusual happens. Systems like this will one day be in use in places like embassies and airports, analyzing the flow of people and objects, and alerting security forces to any suspicious activities.
The Forest of Sensors is a project that's been running for about the past 3 years, and we've had 5 cameras running continuously in the MIT Artificial Intelligence Lab here from the 7th floor, looking down at the surrounding area and tracking the cars and people and trash and whatever else happens to be moving in the environment. And the goal of the project is essentially to model the environment, model the objects in the environment and what those objects do over time. In the upper left, we have a view from a single camera. Next to it, we see where the camera believes objects are moving. Here comes an object, and you can see in the lower right that object being tracked. So the key principle behind our system is to learn patterns, learn the activities that happen in a particular scene that the different types of objects do. Here we see all the cars that pass through the scene during the period of a day, and there were some errors where trees were mistaken for cars, but in general it did about 93% accurate classification of cars. This is all the individual people that pass through the scene over the period of one day. It contains one picture of absolutely everyone who passed through this area. Once we have clusters, which denote the regular activities that happen in a scene, we can say that things are unusual. Say a car moving across the sidewalk or a car on the lawn is very unusual. It's a large object where you haven't seen large objects before. So this shows just the cars that pass through the scene during the day. In fact, we can refine it and say, show us just the red cars that pass through the scene. And there were many pedestrians that passed this path across the grass. But there were some clusters which had some interesting activities, like this pedestrian which walked almost across the path, but then tended to loiter down here. And to see what he's really doing, we have to look up close. You can see he's actually looking at this car and writing that car a ticket. He's one of our security guards downstairs. While we're pretty proud of what we've actually accomplished, we don't really have an intelligent system. It's a system which can learn the patterns and can tell you that something unusual has happened. It doesn't know that there are cars and there are people. It just knows there are 2 different types of things in this environment.
I think one of the reasons people don't realize how hard this problem is, I think there are 2 reasons. The first one is, I suspect people don't realize what a huge portion of their brain is devoted to processing visual information. You can get lots of different numbers, but a good ballpark figure is maybe as much as 1/3 of your brain is devoted to processing vision. And you just don't realize it. It's very imperceptible. It's just something you do. You open your eyes, you see. What's the big deal? It's a little harder for a computer. The second one is related to that, which is that we think of intelligence as being something that is hard to do. So playing chess is hard to do. Great computer systems do that, but that's a hard thing to do. Solving calculus problems is a hard thing to do. And it's hard, we think it's hard because it takes a lot of introspection to think about how you go through those steps of doing that. Vision is very, if you like, pre-attentive. It's something that happens very upfront. You can't introspect about how am I seeing? How am I seeing the shading on your nose? How am I seeing the color of your shirt? You don't think about that. It's something that's natural. And people just simply don't realize that there's a tremendous amount of computation that goes on underneath there. It's just happening in a way that you can't think about how you're doing it.
So you saw this technique called eigenfaces, where they broke up a face into different tones, if you will. If you know anything about acoustics, the sound of a flute or the sound of a guitar or something like that, even playing a pure tone or a single note, will have lots of different components in it that gives you the richness of the sound. So by analogy, the idea was, let's do the same thing for vision, have a fundamental and a first harmonic and other principal components, they're called. That technique has died out. No one uses that, hasn't for at least a decade, maybe 15 years. There are many better techniques that primarily rely on enormous training sets. You saw the number of cars that were used in that MIT surveillance system. Well, the systems that are being trained to recognize faces and learn faces and be able to count the number of faces in this room are trained with millions, sometimes tens of millions, and sometimes many tens of millions of images scraped off of the internet. One of the most important developments for artificial intelligence and pattern recognition is the availability of enormous training sets, examples of faces or cars or whatever it might be. And then you can train these deep neural networks, or there's several other techniques, but it's basically data-driven. And what also comes from these kinds of systems is that it's very difficult to understand how they work. Just as if I ask you, how do you recognize my hand? You have great difficulty. You can start saying, when I used to teach pattern classification at Stanford, my first lecture was on the problem of recognizing a chair. And so I have this wonderful book, Taschen book called 1,000 Chairs. And I'd ask a student, describe what a chair is. Oh, it has 4 legs, it has a back leg, and I just flip. No. And you recognize it instantly, a beanbag chair, one's hanging there, one single post. There are so many varieties. And somehow we instantly look at it and can recognize how, that it's a chair. And it's very, very difficult to sort of write down rules to figure out what makes a chair or a face or any of these complex objects. So the same thing happens with these large networks. At the end, they can't tell us really how they're making these classifications. Yes, you can look at features, looking for edges and looking for little groupings and so forth. But for very complex objects, it's very, very difficult to introspect or figure out what's going on. And this actually has legal ramifications. There are certain very complex AI systems that are trained with recidivism rates for people in jails. And they can actually do quite well. It's predicting whether this person will commit a crime if you let him or her out, and so forth. But the law needs an explanation. Why did you grant him parole and not her? And it's very, very difficult to sort of figure out why the computer said one thing or another. And I've gotten into lots of discussions and arguments. Would you rather be diagnosed by an AI system that was 97% accurate but couldn't tell you how it did it, and you wouldn't know how to sue it if it did, or a person who's completely responsible, you know he went to Stanford Medical School, but he's only 92% accurate? Think about it. I know what I want, but anyway. All right, let me get some more here. Just a second. Oop, no. Okay. All right.
Crisis points in 2001 occur in silence. The moment HAL takes control of the pod, rotates its arms ominously, and pursues Frank. The subsequent murder in the void of outer space, with Frank's frantic but hopeless attempt to reattach his severed air hose. HAL's silence in response to Dave's command, open the pod bay doors, HAL. HAL's murder of the hibernating crewmen, announced by the silent flashing sign, life functions terminated. And Dave's explosive re-entry into the spaceship through the vacuum of the emergency airlock. But the most chilling of such silent moments, and the critical turning point in the film, comes when Frank and Dave retreat to a pod and turn off the electronics. Competent HAL can't hear them. They discuss HAL's apparent malfunction and whether plans should include disconnection should flaws remain. As the camera, showing HAL's view, pans back and forth between their moving mouths, we realize he understands what they're saying. In the silence, HAL is lip reading.
There isn't a single aspect of ship operations that's not under his control. If he were proven to be malfunctioning, I wouldn't see how we'd have any choice but disconnection.
I'm afraid I agree with you.
There'd be nothing else to do.
Be a bit tricky.
Yeah.
We'd have to cut his higher brain functions without disturbing the purely automatic and regulatory systems. And we'd have to work out the transfer procedures of continuing the mission under ground-based computer control.
Yeah. Well, that's far safer than allowing HAL to continue running things.
You know, another thing just occurred to me. Well, as far as I know, no 9,000 computers have been disconnected.
Well, no 9,000 computers ever fouled up before.
That's not what I mean. Well, I'm not so sure what he'd think about it.
The one ability of HAL I was doubtful about, and this was Stanley's idea, was his power of lip reading. First of all, I didn't think it was possible for a computer to lip read. Secondly, why should they bother to give him that facility anyway? That's an interesting point which I don't think I ever explained. Anyway, it certainly produced the most effective sequence.
Scientists use the term speech reading rather than the colloquial lip reading because we use the jaw, the tongue, the teeth, in fact, the whole face when lip reading. There's much more to lip reading than just reading the lips. The computer locates the face in the image and then analyzes the shape of the mouth. Most spoken words or syllables create a distinctive series of shapes. By combining data from the sound and from these images of the lips and jaw, the system improves the accuracy of speech recognition. Humans, it turns out, are more accurate speech reading at 45 degrees because they can see the tongue and teeth better. HAL could lip read from 90 degrees, which is profoundly difficult because you can't see enough of the face. Moreover, HAL could lip read in silence, and that's very, very difficult because too many words are visually indistinguishable. For instance, bat, pat, and mat are visually indistinguishable. Getting a computer system to really lip read in silence is way beyond us now. But even if our computers could infallibly recognize the words we say.
So I built a computer lip reading system right on Sand Hill Road, and it could work pretty well in noisy environments. That's where lip reading really helps. If you're ever at a bar and you're talking to someone and it's really noisy, notice you're not looking at their eyes, you're looking at their lips, and it contains a lot of information. Even just knowing when the person is speaking by watching the lips is very, very useful. Telling the gender can help. And I could talk for hours on lip reading, but let me just give you a little bit of the science. It turns out that the utterances that are hardest to see, to distinguish by eye, are the easiest by ear, and those that are hardest to distinguish by ear are the easiest by eye. Think of the utterances me and knee. You might even miss what I said, but just watch my mouth and I'll say one of them. You know which one it was, just by the sight. Conversely, utterances that are indistinguishable by sight, they're called visemes, like phonemes, but visemes, like ba, pa, ma. You cannot tell by looking. They differ, for instance, in an aspect called VOT, voice onset time. The difference between ba and pa is this delay between the burst sound and the voicing. It's called the vocal folds. And that's very easy to distinguish acoustically. So for those techies in here, it's like an error-correcting code. What's difficult by ear is easy by eye, and so forth. And there are lots of very interesting, tricky problems on how you integrate them. In a quiet room, you'll listen. You want the computer to really listen, rely on the acoustic sound. But in a really noisy room like a bar or something like that, you want to maybe weight a little bit more the evidence of its eyes and so forth. Well, since we did our work back in 2001 or around then, computer lip reading systems have gotten much, much better. And again, they're using new techniques that are based on things like deep learning in order to learn the visual aspect, and a separate one to learn the acoustic information, the sound, if you will, and then how do you put those together in optimal ways. And these may become more prevalent in noisy environments. When you walk up to your ATM machine or something like that, you want it to watch you as you talk to it and so forth, or in cars and things like this. Just a second, let me get the next one.
They still...
All right. The whole film is an hour and a half, and I'm sorry we don't have time for that. But
a lot of talk these days about the pair of words emotional intelligence, which has come to refer to a set of skills that some say is more important for predicting your success in life than IQ, the traditional intelligence quotient. So instead of focusing on mathematical and verbal ability and things like, could HAL play chess, could HAL solve partial differential equations, could HAL converse, which HAL could do quite well at, it focuses on social skills. Could HAL sense if people were disturbed by what HAL said? Could HAL sense if all was well with the crew?
Today's computers have virtually no emotional intelligence, but researchers are working on the problem. Once again, it's a matter of pattern recognition. In this case, recognizing facial expressions. Perhaps by connecting our expressions to our emotions, computers can start to recognize how we feel.
Dealing with emotions is an extremely difficult problem, in part because most of them are just very subtly expressed. In 2001, the astronauts, the human characters, almost never express overt emotions. And yet HAL senses that Dave is stressed, and how he does that is a little bit of a mystery, from the voice or from muscle tension, whatever. But somehow, through the very subtle communication of emotion, it's picked up and responded to.
Look, Dave, I can see you're really upset about this. I honestly think you ought to sit down calmly, take a stress pill, and think things over. I know I've made some very poor decisions recently, but I can give you my complete assurance that my work will be back to normal. I've still got the greatest enthusiasm and confidence in the mission, and I want to help you. Dave, stop. Stop, will you? Stop, Dave. Will you stop, Dave? Stop, Dave. I'm afraid. I'm afraid, Dave.
Well, I think there's going to be a big push toward developing AI entities and smart systems that have emotional intelligence. if only so that it will be easier for us to interact with them. In fact, in 2001, that was one of the points Dave made, that HAL gives the appearance of having emotions. He's programmed that way because it makes it easier for us to interact with him. I believe that we'll find it will just be easier for people to interact with systems when the systems interact on our grounds, on what is natural for us.
Hello. Hello.
I wish I had time for that one too, but I'm sorry, I don't think we do. So the field of affective computing, spelled with an A, has really blossomed since the year 2001, where computers are now trying to tell our emotional state, often for telling our medical state. Is this hypertension? Is this person angry? And so forth. So you do things by analyzing the voice, the prosody, the way you speak, the sharpness of your motions, and things like this. Moreover, affective computing also talks about how you make the computer express emotions. And here we are at SRI, home of Siri. So we have slight emotional lilt in certain aspects of what Siri happens to say, and it makes it easier for us to understand what's going on. So it's really been a very big deal in speech production and also somewhat in speech recognition. And for the last little clip I have, just a second. Just a few thoughts from Arthur C.
rings
Clarke.
around us, and yet so human that when it died, we cared.
I am a HAL 9000 computer, production number 3. I became operational at the HAL plant in Urbana, Illinois on January the 12th, 1997. I seem to be having some difficulty. My first instructor was Dr. Chandra. He taught me to sing a song. It goes like this. Daisy, 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 give me your answer too. I'm half crazy, all for the love of you. It won't be a stylish marriage. I can't afford a carriage. But you look
I should point out that that Daisy Daisy was the first song ever sung by a real computer done at IBM, at Bell Labs in Murray Hill, New Jersey. Well, I'd love to go on, but I don't have much time anymore. I just hope you get an appreciation. This film was made 50 years ago. 50 years ago. Think of other films made at that time. Barbarella. And so with that, I'd like to thank you for your attention. Thank you so much.